Welcome to this podcast in the Living a Revenue Culture series. This series is dedicated to the requirement of a business to have profitable revenue and a culture that can deliver that profitable revenue to ideal customers over the long term. So today, we're really fortunate to have with us Dan Miller. Dan is the founder of Advantive. And Dan and I have been friends for, I think, even before there was an Advantive. So we've been together for a long time. And he is probably one of the most unique guests we're ever going to have because Dan sits in the middle of the revenue process. He works both for the buyers and helps them get the most possible value they can out of, when we talk about what they're getting value out of, they're often spending millions of dollars. So when they're spending that kind of money and it's mission critical, Dan is there to help them get the greatest value possible. He also represents the sellers in a way, and he helps the sellers communicate to those buyers how to get the most value from the sellers. And in both cases, he deals with their cultures, their people, their humans. On the buyer side, sometimes he's dealt with literally thousands of people on the buyer side trying to get their 2 cents worth in on what they're going to buy and what they're going to get. So Dan's role is really unique, and he's adding value to both sides and to the people in the middle of the game. So Dan, welcome.
Well, thank you, Rick. I've been looking forward to this, and for the benefit of the audience, I've known Rick since 1990. I don't know what it was, Rick. 95, maybe.
Yes, I would think that's about right.
Yeah.
And so to help, I purposely kind of gave you a broad introduction.
Mm-hmm.
Share with people what Advantive is about, and give them a little bit about who you are, and then what Advantive is all about, and how it kind of applies to what we're talking about today.
Sure. Well, thank you very much for that introduction. What Advantive is about is really an expression of what I value and I find important. My wife and I have 6 kids, so we have a large organization. I'm the oldest of 7 kids. And I learned early on that in order to get stuff done that created value for everybody, it made a lot of sense to get everyone aligned to help understand, well, what would that value feel like, look like? What would value be? And then it was far easier to organize toward that end rather than advance my agenda or compete or work against somebody else's agenda. So a shared sense of what the best outcome would be was something I just learned early. Also, just my personality type is I can see when people are misaligning and when they're focused on perhaps the wrong things. They might feel they're focusing on the right things because of how they're measured or what they want to achieve for themselves. But if that's contradictory to who they're either trying to serve or even who they might be, teaming with, but has a different sense, then no one is going to be happy. So I have found just in my early years, and then the things I would do, and then embodied in Advantive, is help organizations, help people rethink, re-engineer, reframe what value means and have that be a bigger tent than they might have otherwise seen. And if it's something where it applies to the buyer and the seller, then have them both collectively aligned, sometimes challenge the other, and that could be a two-way street, to clarify what is the real goal here? What are the outcomes? What would we say about what we are going to do together when we get there that describes what was fantastic about what we just did and why where we landed is exactly where we need to be. I love doing that, and that manifested itself in the creation of Advantive. My career was I was a software developer, software architect, built products that led me into talking to large groups of people, found I had a bit of a gift for gab in a large crowd. And could create big...
Today.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Create sort of a sense of excitement around the vision, the mountaintop that we're going to be able to get to together, And I knew how to get them there because I could engineer and create solutions that actually would deliver that value. Well, that led to a career path where I became a head of sales for a software company, and I saw the dissonance, the inefficiency, the really sorrowful endings when organizations did not approach their goals in a way that was healthy, productive, and aligned with all of the stakeholders in a way that would create good behavior with good intention and outcomes, and the sense that if we are to succeed, we kind of all need to be able to succeed. This shouldn't be a buyer beating the heck out of a seller,
Yep.
shouldn't be a seller swindling a buyer, shouldn't be someone leaving somebody at the altar, shouldn't be finger pointing on the way. Create that sense of clarity and alignment at the outset. Always use that as a touchstone for making decisions,
Yep.
and then enabling transparency of process to get there. So built a product called Decision Director, facilitates collaboration with stakeholders on the buying side, facilitates work and collaboration with the sellers on the selling side, and hopefully they end up at a good point. And so far, so good.
And Dan, I know the answer to this, but tell us a little bit about the kinds of things you help facilitate. Because a lot of us would think, well, you're helping somebody buy copy paper or, those kinds of things.
Mhm.
And when what you do, talk a little bit about how it has impact, not just on organizations. We also often think about buying and selling as, well, the selling company and the buying company. You actually deal, particularly on the buying side, with dozens or hundreds, or in some cases, even thousands of humans who have a real vested interest in what's happening. Share a little bit about that, because that's part of the uniqueness of what you get to do.
Sure. Well, so I mentioned software is my background. The kind of software is what's important. It would be in the world of business and software, ERP software. But really what that means would be those major software applications that just about everybody in the organization uses to do their job. Whether they are in the human resources side and they're having to manage personnel and payroll and compensation and scheduling and all the sorts of things. On the finance side, general ledger, accounts payable, accounts receivable, billing, all that sort of stuff. Or in the customer-oriented side, in education, the student information system, in government, the constituent management system, and then other things like facilities management and all that. But it's that software application framework around which organizations get to organize, do their work, track their work, report their results, etc. So it means something. If you boil it down to a human being, it's the thing they're going to deal with every day for the next 10, 12, 15, 20 years, and you want to get it right. You need to get that right. Collectively, it could make or break organizations if they make a poor choice. We're not talking, oh, I bought the wrong pallet of toilet paper. I've just committed $50 million or $500 million into something. It better work. And it's beyond, career impacting, positive or negative. It's the ability of the organization to achieve its objectives, to have the nimbleness and the ability to adapt to new realities and new opportunities and seize them. This is right in the center of that entire equation. So the stakes are really, really high. And the stakes are high often for the public because many of our customers are public sector organizations. We facilitated a process to create alignment for all of the key stakeholders, key employees of all of the agencies and departments in the state of Florida, for example, because they were planning to spend $500 million on a new finance system. Now, why would they want to do that? Well, because all those agencies, all those departments, each had kind of their own systems. They weren't talking to each other, and they inhibited the ability of those agencies and departments to serve their constituents, because you do one thing with one department, then you get some communication for another department. We've all said, don't these people talk to each other? You know, so it solves those kind of problems, but it's $500 million of public money that's going to be oriented towards or invested in this solution. So extremely important to ensure the stakeholders are clear about what they're going to achieve. They buy into the upcoming change. It's going to be very disruptive, so they can get to the value, and to make sure that the sellers understand what's important to those buyers in order to then optimize their messaging to demonstrate capability in conjunction with those points of value, and commit collectively to the work that's needed to get the job done.
And you just said something to me that's just incredibly important. It's the seller understands what's important to the buyer. And in, you know, the work the revenue game does, and the whole living a revenue culture, we talk about things from the buyer's frame of reference backwards. And, you know, what I've seen with Advantive is, first, from the buyer's side, the humans in the buyer's organization, when they spend $500 million or 50 million or whatever, and it's a piece of software that's going to run for 10 years or 20 years, you're really describing what the work is going to be like for the human being for the rest of their career if they stay where they are. And they're either going to be happier or madder or sadder or frustrated or stressed or whatever. So talk a little bit about how you understand or gather what's really important from that buyer frame of reference, and help the seller be aware of what that is. Because I think that's a big part of what you do.
It is a big part, and you know what? The future is you know, very exciting as it relates to that. 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, the conversation would be really about, in the world I live within, 5,000, 10,000 very detailed, specific features and functions and so forth. And the belief was, if the buyer asks enough detail, and the vendors can say, yeah, we could do all these things, then of course we're going to be successful. And if you read any of the literature around major enterprise software application projects, the success rate is fairly abysmal. Because, yeah, you specified this, I did this, but it didn't produce the outcome that we were seeking to achieve, and we couldn't figure out a way to articulate that outcome. So in order for a buyer's frame of reference, when delivered or made available to the seller, it's got to be relevant. It's got to have some traction that represents to the world, these guys know what they're talking about. So what we have found, it needs to be an iterative process. That, you know, the buyers who are going to get out there and do a new thing that's going to be for the next 20 years, think about it. They spent the last 20 years doing the thing that old way. It was new when it was when it was new, but now it's kind of old. It's like coming out of a cave. They have to think, what is available to us now? What could life be like? So they often have to be educated, in many ways challenged, sometimes by the very suppliers and sellers that have been investing, and maybe they're new. They weren't around 20 years ago, but they see the world differently, and they have success with like-minded peers that have also seen the world differently. How do we extract from that new world of thinking to create opportunity thinking within the framework and the mindset of the buyer? So we seek to extract that kind of insight, information, and useful topics, and provide them to the buyers in order to go, wow, there could be something new. That's something we could achieve. That's where the conversation starts. And then that gets refined, and then we help them clarify what's truly important. Let's prioritize those things. Now, with those things in mind, let's identify the capabilities, not 10,000, but several hundred core capabilities with some stories behind them that talk about these little vignettes around how we process a new employee onboarding scenario. With those stories, with those outcomes, with those key capabilities, we can now have a meaningful conversation with the marketplace, with the sellers. They know we know what we're talking about. We're speaking their language. They're speaking our language. and we could be clear and make a really good decision.
Yeah, Dan, for those people who have been through or tried to go through a process like that to match, I've been through them as on the buyer side, and it sometimes took us years to get all of our people, even if we only had hundreds of people, and you deal with organizations that have tens of thousands of people, and getting all of their stories and getting all of what are the critical outcomes sounds daunting, and I think historically has been daunting. What's different now?
So what is different now, there's a few things. Culture has shifted. The stories are more important now than they were 20 years ago. Partly because 20 years ago, you get what you got, uh, what was delivered. And if you wanted to spend a lot of money and incorporate risk, then you go ahead and modify the thing to make it work. Fast forward to today, and I don't know what the influences are. Before we started recording, we talked about, the social platforms and things like that. But stories matter. Stories have always mattered in humanity. Major movements in the world have been based upon the stories that create the impetus to drive change, and clarity and alignments, how people connect and create trust and belief and commit to one another. So the importance of stories, I think, have now shifted into, not shifted, but also placed themselves into these business conversations. So that's a shift. The ability to gain the stories,
Yes.
and the interest in pursuing the stories has also enhanced. So we have a platform, happens to be called Decision Director, where we are able to capture people's stories. One of the things in these large projects that we're a part of is often the client, the buyer, will engage a consultant, and that process will consist of workshops where people can actually assemble. Now we do it in Zoom, right? It used to be in actual things, to tell the stories. And the goal is to get the stories, and from the stories extract the key things that we could focus on and create structure around. And you do that 100 times, and in a uniform way, you now can extract that structure from each one of those stories. Now you have a framework, and you could use that framework to drive the fact finding, but behind the framework are the stories in context to create the understanding, oh, I get you people now, in the minds of the alert seller who says, you know what, I could be successful doing the checklist thing to a point, but I can win when that buyer organization knows that I understand them through their stories. I can have relevant stories about my successes and our joint clients who are very much peers to those. And through all of that, we can both envision success together. That's really what's changed.
So Dan, tell me a little bit about time, because two things, I guess. One is, it sounds to me like through the stories, you're creating a common language or experience vision, both for the buyer and the seller. Because when the buyer creates these stories and you kind of focus them, then everybody can see the story, hear the language, and they go, oh, now the finance department and the operations department see the same story, hear the language, and they actually know what each other's talking about. And if the buyer chooses or the seller chooses to engage that way, they can know what everybody's talking about and have a common language. Now, the other thing is, I know you've changed the time frame for this work. Years ago, this work could take 2 or 3 years.
Right.
So tell me a little bit, am I right that we're getting a common language? And tell me about the time frames.
So yes, you're right about getting the common language, common approach, and the capture of that does create the model that can be then the template, if you want to think about it that way, then deployed for each of the other departments or entities within the organization. So that helps. To have common language, to have the same rhythm of storytelling and capture and distillation of key elements of that, and connect those. I mentioned the structure, that it then creates a framework. That all works. Here's one of the things, by the way, that ends up happening. You have a large organization, they have, different departments. Maybe the departments don't view one another favorably. It might be that the legal department is viewed by the sales department as a sales prevention agency because of all of that stuff. Yet the legal department is saying, hang on a second, there's risk to the organization if we were to do exactly what you wanted to do. Here's why this is important to us. Here's what we need to be able to do in order to achieve the kind of structure and security that we need. We want to enable what you're doing, but here's what we need you to do to enhance that. We understand your why. So the stories get shared not just with the seller, but across the enterprise. And there's a unification and an appreciation that starts to occur that was an unintended benefit of that process that can then be leveraged. We've had people write articles about that. Oh my gosh, we went into this process thinking we're going to buy new software. We came out of the process having a totally new and better understanding of each other. And it doesn't matter what software we now buy, we know we're going to be successful because we now understand each other. So they could live with their old system, do whatever they need to do. So that works. The technology and the methodology and good enablement have taken those, and you're right, Rick, 2-3 years of agonizing effort, mundane, people hated it to do the work, into something that's exciting, because the one thing about stories is people love to tell them. I mean, you're hearing my energy because I get to tell my story, and you are masterful at pulling people's stories out. Well, do that with people that have never had anybody ask their story. With a team of people that can then share stories, and all of the ahas and the fun and the laughter, all that stuff that happens, it becomes an enjoyable process. And we could take 2-3 years down to 4 months to capture and do that. Then however long it takes to do the procurement and whatnot, but to distill down to, this is us, this is our story, one of which we're proud and excited, and through all these stories, and we are on the same page. We all want the same goals. That wasn't quite clear before 4 months ago. Now let's align on and determine what are the major things that we ultimately want to focus. So the top executive sponsor can say, what I'm hearing, what I'm saying is that all of you here are going to align on these 3 major things that we're going to go get. This is what we're going to be able to achieve. So now you have alignment on the goals of the organization. Those could be conveyed to the sellers. The stories can support it. The framework can give something to connect to. And now you can have meaningful dialogue leading to an effective decision.
Wow. I mean, 2 things just jump off the page for me on that. One is the impact. We obviously, this series is on living a revenue culture. And when an organization all of a sudden goes from silos competing with each other on, headcount and direction and intention and metrics and who gets, this resource, to all of a sudden focusing on those 3 things going forward, my belief would be, first, that the organization must do a whole lot more of what they intended to do, because everybody knows what it is. And so, then the second thing, that as you talked about the 3 years down to 4 months, with the change that's going on in our world, whatever I started to do 3 years ago, the technology, the virus economy, the whatever, has changed so much that, if I'm honest with myself, I probably need to start over again, because what I was wanting to do 3 years ago doesn't even exist anymore.
Right. And you better hope it doesn't take 2 or 3 years to do this round 2, because you'll be in the same boat.
Is that what you see?
Yeah, it is definitely what we see. In fact, it's interesting. We often come in as a let's do it right this time solution for organizations that went 2 and 3 years now and are found themselves in a changed world, and they need to redo it. In the worst case, they went 2 and 3 years, made exactly the wrong choice, and put money, time, lost opportunity, sometimes lost careers or Certainly people just said, I can't do this anymore. So a lot of pain to do it right. So the confidence level is dramatically increased because now it's a transparent process. It's a meaningful process. The people that actually, quote, do the work are contributing in meaningful ways to the
Yeah.
process that is going to change how they do the work and understand why, connect it to different things. So it's a different and far better in world now than it was before then. It was so painful before.
Let's kind of change sides of the table for a minute.
Yep.
The research is really, really clear. Buyers in general are becoming more sophisticated, faster, and more knowledgeable about how to buy than sellers are changing to match them up. The buyers are doing all the things you talked about. They're creating a whole new level of awareness. They have access to everybody's website, all the articles written and the customer reactions to everything. So sellers have to try and catch up in this, and you really throughout Advantage Life have represented both sides of that equation. What can sellers do today, and what should they be doing so they can really be value added to their ideal buyer group?
Yeah, number one thing I'll tell you right off the bat is uh, work with their successful customers to identify, talk about a framework and common language, to identify what were the outcomes that they were able to achieve through their investment in that platform or offering, whatever that the seller had. I'd boil it down to the outcomes. And I'd do it with enough of the customers, and I'd allocate a team of people to do nothing but this. Don't talk to me for a year, come back with a big body of work. Identify the outcomes, organize the outcomes, then align them into an outcomes framework. So now you have an instrument to go and help the buyers start to do outcomes thinking and connection to this whole body of peers that have just gone through some outcomes thinking and exposition. So now we're able to have the conversation that matters. It's a value-based conversation that we have. It's not a commodity feature function. I could beat you up for price. Well, I know how to pocket stuff in the contract to get more money. And we aren't talking about the goal. We're talking about the transaction. And that's the wrong place to be talking today. And a sophisticated buyer is going to smell that. A sophisticated buyer is going to say, I've got 3 vendor choices. 2 of them are trying to sell me on feature function and whiz-bang technology. But there's one who speaks my language, who I would bring all day long into the boardroom. I'd introduce to my CFO, my COO, my CEO, however that goes, because they get it, because they've had those conversations with those very people intentionally and extracted all of the components of value in an organized way that I can now use to drive value-based, outcomes-oriented conversations in my organization. And that principle, by the way, expands beyond or extends well beyond just this sort of transaction. It's a whole idea and culture shift within organizations to get good at talking about outcomes.
Well, and Dan, that's just wonderful, because one of the things that seems to be obvious to me, but I don't see it written about or talked about enough, is there's a whole new skill set required on the seller side. Do you see that? And what kinds of skills are we missing that the sellers got to get their hands on in order to make this happen?
Yeah, sellers are often in a tough situation because they've got results to get, right? And their reflex action or intent is, well, if our job is to sell, let's get the best salespeople we can possibly get, and their job is to get our money out of those people's pockets and put it in our bank. And we'll worry about delivery later. It's that old thing about, the hunter and the skinner, and the hunter comes busting into the cabin, says, I got one for you. And the skinner goes, great. But what he got is a live snarling bear with teeth and claws, because they're not happy with what they did. And this guy's got to skin the bear. It shouldn't be that way. So there's it may be something where it's a transitional period of time, but it has to be strategically intentional. And that is to do the bedrock work that I just described about understanding what truly is valuable. Now, there are people and companies that do that, but I think they fall short because they don't do it well or do it in such a way that they can infuse the buyer, the prospective customers' thinking in an accessible way to leverage that body of work, that type of thinking. So creating ways to take this well-crafted, well-developed body of work that's outcomes focused so that that could be accessible to the buying side of the market who's ready to become a purchaser, and let it create value inside their organization. Then that alignment happens. That takes time, it takes intentionality, but once you're there, you are on the top of the heap.
Well, and part of what as I'm listening, something I see all the time is we find even in a large organization, you find 2 or 3 sales marketing people who think like you just were talking about, but they're in an organization that still expects somebody to bring the live bear in and skin it without having to do the work in between. And so there's this organizational issue, so that the skill is not just for the individual human, because they get frustrated. And, we would call that the cost of chaos when we try and make delivery kill and skin the bear when, that's not what they're supposed to be doing at all. Do you see organizations making these kinds of changes? And are there tools?
We're starting to see it kind of gets to the culture of organizations and where they believe their durable value rests, the value that they both produce and deliver, and understand it's in partnership with every single one of their customers, right? Because the customers have to buy into that same thing and commit resources to achieve that value. But if they are value oriented, starting with the buyer's frame of reference, the customer's success as the goal. Yeah, they have financial goals and strategic goals, but all of them end up falling apart if they are improperly rested. They have to rest upon customer success. Then that changes everything. It changes what the roles are. If a salesperson gets fully comped on the multi-million-dollar sale, they've made their money, and it doesn't matter what happens after that, then that goes against that kind of model. So shared responsibility, accountability, and a share in the reward, being compensated and have benefit from long-term success, which feeds other success, which creates the raw materials to be mined for this outcomes conversation that I was talking about earlier. So it's taking a different view of the world and committing in a different way to a different model, to a much better set of outcomes for that selling organization.
Yep. No, this is wonderful. And the last question for you, the last topic for us to talk about is all the things. I just love the things you've talked about, because to me they seem to be intentional. They seem to be they have a methodology that goes with them. And so what that says to me is I can continuously improve them. And when we talk about the revenue culture, CEOs or CFOs, they cannot be the ones responsible for the continuous improvement of the whole organization. That's the humans in the organization doing the work. It's just like you described on the buyer side. I'm the one who's doing the accounting or the student system. I'm the one who can tell you how to make it better. And I can improve it daily, weekly, monthly. So as we look at the things you're talking about, it sounds like this is a formula for both sides to continuously improve the outcomes they're getting, because now they're actually measuring and paying attention to outcomes and the roles the two buyers and sellers play in each other's lives. Am I on the right page?
I think you're absolutely on the right page. And as you're speaking, I think this is also true. You talk companies, good companies say we focus on the things that we do best. We deliver turbines or we deliver this. That's what we do best. They're really good at it. often that's from an engineering point of view out, right? And they got their supply chain, distribution, et cetera. When an organization can flip and say, what we really do best is to clearly understand what is most important to our client organizations. We get really good at understanding what those outcomes need to be. We happen to have competency in a particular area and a deployment of a technology or something other that we can actually sell and do to create those outcomes. But if you have that orientation, customer success is paramount, the means to understand what defines customer success, then you actually have created a lot of options for yourselves, because you could say, that's what this customer or this body of customers, this segment of the market is going to need to be successful as we look down the road. Let's go and find the things that will deliver that success. So that's coming at the market and the world from the market frame of reference, the customer frame of reference, driving it. And if we've got engineering chops and we have distribution, we know how to sell, we know how to align with the customers, then it almost doesn't matter what we bring to the market, because what we create is value.
Yep.
And as the world shifts, maybe a product line starts to sunset. What do? People often go down to that ship because they don't have an idea what to do, because they never connected with what created value, never developed that as a methodology and a competency. That's why people run out of options, because they ran out of vision. And that's the problem and the opportunity.
That's really wonderful, because as I'm listening, I'm realizing that our conversation internally, if I'm a seller, internally, my conversation needs to be about how do we continue to add new value to our buyers, because the buyer's world is changing. If we only bring them old value, they're quickly going to go find somebody else.
Right.
And the other thing is, if we are really the thought leader or the innovator we think we are, we shouldn't just focus on today's transaction. We should be helping the buyer preview, if you go with this, here's where you go in the future. And those are the things that you've said you need to do anyway. So that becomes our continuous improvement model of continually improving the value to the buyer over time.
There's a company, I won't name names in this session. They started a number of years ago, but not too many years ago. And what they do differently, and has been to their great success, is to be the thought leader, drive thinking, challenging kinds of thoughts, and deliver that kind of thinking to their very small base of customers that were Fortune 500 type things. As they developed that thought leadership, they also began to derive and create services that aligned with the kind of outcomes that those organizations needed. So they had services that they were able to do. So now they were a thought leader as well as a strategic partner. What they then ended up doing is creating a competency in analyzing the marketplace, because they would hear about all these pain points or opportunities because they were a trusted advisor to that organization. So they bought a company that did market analysis, kind of like a Gartner kind of thing, but it wasn't Gartner. So now they have not only thought leadership, trusted advisor, advisory relationship, strategic partner and provider, but also a market framer that would, do the, kind of the rating and ranking of issues and providers and where they were and so forth. Now they're starting to become an aggregator. They're able to say to their customer, Boeing, there are all these different things, some of which we can provide and do, because that's what we've been doing, and we'll make those choices selectively. But we also now have insight to an array of services and providers. We think this or this combination, this organization in concert with us, are going to help you be successful there. Here are the players to watch. So they shifted their business model to now be a constant partner with their customer, a trusted advisor. If that customer could say, if I could hire the smartest, most dynamic team of people in the world to be on my team, it'd be those guys. Yet these guys can be that for now. It's in the hundreds and close to 1,000 customers doing the same thing. It's all about your frame of reference, your perspective, and how you see the world, and how you want to create value in partnership with your customers.
Well, and I just love that model because both parties, it's built on trust and it's built on, the commitment, joint commitment to each other. And as it grows, it becomes, why would I ever want to change? Why would I ever even consider writing an RFP and sending it out to 3 other people and hope they understand my
Right.
company well, and hope they integrate with my people as well, and hope they see the future the same way. I mean, it would be ridiculous. So it's that joint commitment that's way beyond just, being a supplier. It's getting in their head and from their frame of reference.
It is, and I'll tell you, it's, if you look at it from the buyer's point of view, that type of company who can rise to that level of trusted advisor, thought leader, strategic partner, that company creates for the buyer a tunnel through which you can actually cut through the noise in the marketplace to identify clearly those that are going to deliver the real value that we need. So it removes the chaos to a great extent. Therefore, the risk, the time, the cost is largely removed out of the equation. But here's the other part. The selling organizations begin to be drawn to that because they know if they can up their game, then they fall into that focal point at the end of that tunnel, that it cuts right through the marketplace. And that's what the buyers are looking at with this advisor relationship. And that's how a market really ought to work, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
And
intimacy.
it's interesting as I listen, and one of the things we talk about is organizations really perform on 3 levels. They have a strategy, they have deployment structure that supports execution, which is the 3rd level. You've put in so many examples of really powerful deployable structure that when you put in the way to capture stories, when you put in ways to, have the seller think from the buyer's frame of reference, now the things that strategically were a good idea, you actually can go execute because you have a deployable structure in place for the people who do the execution to work from.
Exactly. And you know what's important, Rick, when you look at it, this scales, right? I mean, you and I are talking at the fairly massive scale level, but let's bring it down to the small firm, like a CPA firm, 3 or 4 people on staff. And some would say, we do QuickBooks. Take your transactions in the bank. We do all this sort of stuff. Well, many of them, of course, are alert enough to say, we're going to do some financial advising, maybe move into some strategic advising, other kinds of things, because we have intimate knowledge and insight into our customers' organization, and we can deploy that in an effective way for our customers, and we can extract from all of that we have done to know that fundamentally, from our point of view, there's 3 things that our customers really need assistance with, and we drive those 3 things. And it doesn't matter if you're a small construction company, doesn't matter if you're a mid-sized manufacturer. It's the intimate, intentional relationship with your customer base, extracting outcomes, converting that to the identification and achievement of value, and how do I help my partners, my customers, those I serve, do that over and over and over and over again.
Yep.
There's the magic.
Well, Dan, I'd love, you and I can do this all day long, but
yes, we could.
I think this is a great place for us to pause, and I want to thank you for joining me today and joining all of us. And is there anything you want to leave us with that you think we should be thinking about?
Well, the reason I wanted to do this conversation with you, Rick, is I think that, what's true about the world is that there's a very small percentage of people who actually understand and are accountable for and seek to find better ways to drive revenue, to drive business, to create employment, to do all the things that we need to do to keep our economy and our livelihoods moving. It's not just something that happens, over there. I'm an employee in a company. I don't know what exactly they do. I just know I get a paycheck or whatever. It's understanding that we're still always talking about how humans interact with humans, how decisions are made, how money transacts. You know, it's not a dark art. It's not a black box. There is artfulness to it, but you can boil it down to understanding and even to a science, which is really what you have forged and what has drawn me to these conversations we've had. And for the average person disconnected from the process to understand it's humans dealing with humans, there are ways to make that better. When we do that, our economy, our jobs, our companies, our families, everybody benefits. That's the key about this.
Dan, I thank you. I hope everybody enjoyed this as much as I have, and hopefully we'll get you back sometime.
I'd
Thanks.
look forward to it, Rick. Thank you very much.